Hey there, and welcome back to our Read Through the Bible in a Year series. Here we are, week number 7, day number 3, finishing up our look in the book of Numbers, Numbers chapters 30 through 36. Let's jump right in. So it starts out today with a section about making vows and taking pledges and making oaths, making vows to God. And first off, let's talk about what that is. In this case, it's something above and beyond a special promise, dedication that somebody would make to God. God, I am going to do this. God, I'm going to give this. And that was expected to be followed through on. If you made this vow to God, it was you were to uphold that vow, or God took it very seriously if you didn't. And here we have how the issue of vows is handled with women who are not married and who are living in their father's household, and then with wives. And as I've discussed before, I think the way you look at this kind of depends on the view you want to have about the Bible and women. I think if you come at it from the point of view of that the Bible is anti-woman, then it'd be very easy to take this passage and just say, oh look, here it is again. Women can't make decisions for themselves. But I want to come at it from a view of God's love and grace and mercy. Now, the truth is that at this time, this was a patriarchal society, and so a lot of things were set up in a way where the fathers and husbands had a lot of control and a lot of influence. But beyond that, let's just stop and think a second. The father who heard his daughter make a vow, or the husband who heard his wife make a vow, and felt that it was something that they should not do, then they have the ability to say, no, you cannot make that vow. And now, the way I look at this is that I see this as probably in the cases of maybe where they made a very rash vow. They spoke quickly and said they were going to do something, or they were going to give something. And the question from the father of the husband, there was uncertain as to whether that was a truthful vow they were speaking, that was something they were going to actually uphold or be able to uphold. So here I see it more as a protection, as grace and as mercy, in saying, no, don't make that vow, because I don't think you're going to follow through with it. I don't think you're going to be able to follow through with it, and I don't want you to say something, make a promise to God that you can't keep, because I don't want I don't want you to have to answer to God for that. And the truth is, I've said many things in my life that I wish I could have taken back. I wish somebody could have stood there and said, no, don't say that. No, you can't do that. No, that's not going to happen. So I see this from the point of view of protection, and love and concern. And the question it makes me think about for us today is we need to think very seriously about things we say to the Lord. And I'm not talking here about making some special God, I promise if you do this, I'm going to do this. I'm talking about the way we live our lives every day. And we say to God, God, if you show me what you want me to do, I will do it. God, if you show me the right answer for how to handle this, I will do it. God, if you make it known to me, put on my heart somebody you want me to go talk to about you, or somebody you want me to go visit, God, I will do that. And that should be what our daily walk with Christ looks like. God, you lay it on my heart what it is you want me to do, and I'll go do that. But in a sense, that's almost like making a vow. We're saying, God, we're going to do something. So it's just a reminder to us, to follow through and to be obedient when God puts something on our heart, and to follow through with doing it. All right, let's talk a little bit about what happens now with the Midianites, where God instructs Moses and the people to go and pretty much wipe out the Midianites. And this, of course, is in context with what's just happened previously, when they were camped out on the plains of Moab, and Balak, the king, summoned Balaam to try to curse the people. And then we see here like the Midianites and the Moabites are all kind of mixed together, basically trying to stop God's people. And what ends up happening, you might remember that terrible, we talked about rebellion, where the people of God, the men, basically start worshiping false gods because they become seduced by the Midianite women, and they start they start relationships with them, and then they start following their gods that they worship. And so God here is punishing, he's taking out the punishment on the Midianites for what they have done in turning away a lot of the Israelites to pagan worship. And now, let's just remember a couple things. God has already, he's not just punishing the Midianites, he's already punished, he's already, disciplined, he's already enacted consequences on the Israelites for what they had done. You might remember in the previous day's reading where they had the plague that went through the camp and affected the people because of the sin they had committed and taking up with the Midianite women and starting to worship the pagan gods. So now God is enacting the consequences for sin on the Midianites for their involvement in doing this also. And you may notice in here, remember we talked previously about Balaam and how he was, kind of we weren't really quite sure what to make of Balaam. But as we look at the rest of the Bible, we see his character. Well, we see that Balaam was killed along with the Midianites. And we say, well, why was he? And we're given an answer to it way ahead in the book of Revelation. In Revelations 2:14, it says, nevertheless, I have a few things against you. You have people there who hold to the teachings of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin by eating food sacrificed to idols and by committing sexual immorality. So this whole plan, this whole plot, that Balak came up with, that the people came up with when they couldn't curse the Israelite people, they came up with this new plot to, well, we'll have our women seduce the men and get them to fall into pagan worship and into our worship. That whole plot was hatched by Balaam. And so we see here Balaam is paying for the consequences of his sin. And so we might get uneasy as we're reading some of this, and if we get uneasy here, we're really going to get uneasy as we get into the book of Joshua. But let me go ahead and kind of set this idea out there now for us to keep in mind. We see as part of the consequences, the punishment, God's justice being fulfilled on the Midianites here, that everybody was, almost everybody was killed, including, of course, the men, and then including the women who had been part of the plot of seducing the men, and including the sons. Basically, all that's left is the young daughters, the ones who had not possibly been able to be involved in the seducing the Israelite men. And we get uneasy. We start reading this. Wow, all these people were killed, and it seems tragic, and it is tragic. But there is the reality here that, as I've discussed before, and we'll discuss plenty more again, is that God punishes sin. There are consequences when we don't walk with God. And here, the Midianite people, the Moabite people, these were people who worshipped false gods. These were people who did not, care for God, who did not worship the one true God. So, in all of this is punishment for the fact, the wages, what they had earned. The Bible teaches us the wages of sin is death. What we have earned for disobeying God. So it's brought upon ourselves. And when we sin, we bring the wages, the consequences upon ourselves. And so these people, just like all the other pagan nations that the Israelites are going to encounter, that they're going to go to war with, they have brought this on themselves. The wages of their sin, the wages of choosing to follow something other than the one true God. In this case, is death. And that holds true today. We live our life going our own way, making not factoring God into it, not wanting anything to do with God, not ever asking for forgiveness.
From God for eternity. So God's judgment hasn't changed over time. He still judges sin. Our sin still separates us from Him. We just see it in this case being kind of enacted right away, whereas today we may live our whole life this way, but then one day die and be forever separated from God because we've never fixed that relationship with Him. And so I just want to point out one specific thing that kind of keep applying to us today.
on the fact that where the women were killed, the women who had done the seduction. It made me think of this. These women were the source of temptation. They were the sources of temptation that had led the Israelite men astray. Of course, the Israelite men were responsible for their actions, and they were judged for those actions. But this was the source of temptation. So today it makes me think with ourselves, we need to identify the sources of temptations in our life, and we need to remove those. Whatever it may be, whatever the things that can tempt us the most. And the fact is, Satan, our enemy, he knows those things. He observes us and he sees those things. He throws those things out there at us. So we need to identify things that are stumbling blocks to us, things that are temptations to us, and it's going to be different for all of us. And we need to remove those so that they can't snare us and they can't trap us. All right, going ahead and looking at some more of the reading today. I want to just read a couple verses and just talk for a second about what it says. In chapter 33, at the end of it, they're being instructed that when they go into the promised land, when they cross in, which we're going to see in the book of Joshua, how they are to just go through and get rid of everything. Because remember, they're going to be going, as I just said, into a pagan environment where everybody's worshiping false gods. In verse 55 it says this: "But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They will give you trouble in the land where you will live, and then I will do to you what I plan to do to them." And the sad thing here is this is really a foreshadowing of what's going to happen. The Israelites, once they go in, they're not going to completely drive out the people, and over time they're going to be influenced greatly by the anti-God pagan society around them, and a lot of them are going to fall into the pagan worship also. And so it reminds me, and for us today, as we have to once again be careful of our influences, be careful of those that we allow to have great influence on us. Once again, I'm not saying that means that we don't have we're not friends with people who don't believe in God, with non-Christians. We definitely need to be, because we need to be a source of influence for them, showing them the love of God. But we don't want to allow ourselves to be in relationships where there is a high level of influence over us, which could pull us away from our walk with God. At the same time, just as God says here, he told the people, if you do that, I will do to you what I plan to do to them. He says, I will hold you responsible for your own actions. So we got to remember that today. We can't say to God, well, but God, my friend made me do this. They tempted me and I couldn't handle it. Well, we should have followed God's advice to start with and not allow ourselves to be influenced by those people. But at the same time, we are responsible for our actions, and we'll have to answer for those actions. A final thought for today, the cities of refuge. We see where God plans these special cities, these 6 towns that will be throughout the land once they move into the land and take it over, where if somebody accidentally kills somebody else, they can flee to one of these cities, and it prevents the family of the person they killed from seeking vengeance themselves. And in that chapter, there's a lot of kind of rules given about if you purposely kill somebody, this is what's going to happen. If you unintentionally kill somebody, this is what's going to happen. Nobody can be accused of killing somebody and convicted without multiple witnesses that saw it. There's this theme throughout that entire section, and it's this: God takes life very seriously. Life is sacred to God. Now, at the same time, you might say, wait a second, but we're talking about how God is wiping out all these pagans and stuff, and the fact is when he's carrying out his justice and his holiness, and he's enacting the consequences of their sin on them, God still takes life seriously. In Ezekiel 33:11, there's this beautiful verse that says this: God is speaking, and he says, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. It's not this image that some people have of God, of this guy sitting up there with lightning bolts just ready to strike people down. God says, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. That chapter, he goes on in Ezekiel 33, he goes on to say, my heart is that they would turn from their sin and that they would repent. So life is very serious to God. Life is sacred to God. So for us, what does that mean? Life should also be sacred to us. And I see this in a couple of applications. Number one, we should take very seriously trying to meet the needs of people around us and around the world who struggle with life, who are in severe poverty, who are experiencing famine. who are experiencing water shortage, just where there's great needs, where people are dying just by the thousands, and what can we do? How can we help? How can we show that life is sacred to us and help in those situations? But number two, it's also spiritual life should be sacred to us. Our friend, our neighbor, our family member, who is perfectly healthy and has everything they possibly need, but they don't know Jesus. And so their spiritual life is one of death, death and separation from God. So we need to take their spiritual life very seriously and do what we can to try to bring true life to them, having God in their life. So today, as we conclude our look, as we conclude our time in the book of Numbers, may we be people who take seriously what we say to God, who take seriously our call to follow through on what God is putting on our hearts. May we be people who identify the sources of temptation in our life and remove those so they will not be stumbling blocks. May we be people who take life very seriously and who under God's leadership do what we can to help those who are hurting, and to help those who don't know Jesus, and to speak true life into their life. All right, y'all have a great day, and I will see you next time.